You might not even be thinking about retirement and your super and what the balance could look like when you actually need to retire. But I assure you that the earlier you start thinking about your super, the better it'll be for yourself, especially later on when you're a little older. So in this video, I'm going to share with you exactly how buying real estate in your SMSF could help you potentially get to your goals even quicker. If you guys are interested in my thoughts, then definitely keep watching. Hey guys, my name is Ravi and welcome back to Personal Finance with Ravi Sharma. If you're new here, smash that subscribe button because I talk about real estate, personal development, and all things financial freedom. Now, I can't give you direct advice around purchasing your properties in your SMSFs, but what I can do is educate you around what is possible and what I'm seeing people out there actually do. When I say people out there, we've got hundreds of clients right now also purchasing in their SMSF, and there's a good reason why. Now, again, you're gonna have to consider your entire situation properly before you even embark on purchasing real estate, let alone purchasing real estate in a super account. So you need to do the due diligence, and if you need help, we can point you in the right direction with licensed people that can help you get on the right track. Now, this video is a very timely video because there are more and more people that, one, can't borrow in their own personal names because of borrowing capacity issues, and two, every single day, another person gets to the retirement age and doesn't have enough money to retire. So unfortunately, what that means is that you get to 60 or 65, but you have to continue working. Now, when you sign up to working full time, which we all just had to, you had this thought in your mind that if you work for about 40 years, you get to retirement and you should be able to enjoy life. But what we're finding now, especially here in Australia, is that that dream of retiring and retiring on your own terms at the age of 60 or 65 is actually just a distant dream now. And this is why it's so important that you think about this in your 20s, 30s, and 40s, rather than getting to 60 and thinking, oh my God, I'm not gonna have enough money to actually retire. Which then means that you're working well into your 70s and 80s. Now, I recently took a trip to LA because Spotify flew me out and we were doing some collaboration work. And by the way, if you want to check out the entire vlog of what happens on that trip and the people I've met, which I assure you were absolutely mind-blowing, then definitely go and subscribe to my vlog channel. Well, I'm going to give you a behind the scenes, all access pass to everything I do in my personal and business life. So definitely go and subscribe to that. But in my trip, I looked at people that were on the streets, homeless. I looked at how the system was there. I asked a lot of people questions and I realized that in Australia, we have it really good. And we need to take advantage of having it really good where we can solidify our own wealth. Now, I'm not saying go out there and you have to purchase 20, 30, 40 properties to get to financial freedom. I'm saying that you need to start taking this seriously because what you realize is that we have a really good opportunity here to have a good life. I'm not saying boats and cars and things like that. I'm saying you have an option of not to work in your 70s and 80s. And sometimes we forget how grateful we should be to not be in that position like most people are overseas. So let's break down some numbers, understand what the average super balance is and what the dire situation is right now. And I think it's only going to get worse. So what can we do right now to supercharge our portfolios? Now, at the time of retirement, the average balance for men is $435,000 and for women is about $314,000. The question you've got to ask yourself is, the house that you're living in completely paid off? And are you single or are you as part of a couple? Because if you're part of a couple, you pretty much end up close to about $750,000. Now, before you get too excited and think, oh my God, that's actually a lot of money, you're gonna realize that it's actually not. If you think about using that $750K, you need to consider whether your house is paid off. Because if you do have a house and it's completely paid off, then $750K there is pretty good. But that's probably your best case situation at the moment. With the rising house prices here in Australia, it's becoming harder and harder to just purchase the property, let alone having to pay off the entire thing in 30 years' time. If you want a video about how you can pay down your entire home loan in less than 10 years, then definitely let me know in the comments down below saying house paid off with Ravi, and I'll make that video for you. Now let's assume the single male has their house paid off and the $435,000 is invested in shares or ETFs, and your average return is about 4%. Now, I know that people are going to say, well, the average return right now is about 7 or 10%, but I'm accounting for inflation as well. So when you account for inflation being around 3%, your real number is going to be 4% in this case. So based on that, you're earning $17,400 a year. And you can quickly see how that's not going to be enough for you to live properly. Now you could say, well, your house is paid off, so 17,000 divided by 50 is what you're pretty much going to have to use for expenses. But we're accounting for what could it look like in 20 or 30 years if that's when you're retiring. I would say that that's very scary. Let's assume that you're a single female. It gets even worse, where you're making less than $13,000 a year. Now, let's say you are a couple, you're at $750,000, and at 4%, you're making about $30,000 a year, which again is about $600 a week. And right now, with everything costing so much more, do you really think you could survive on $600 a week? What happens if there's a medical emergency? You're gonna have to dip into that $750K as well, which means that principal is never growing. So it sits there at 750, you keep getting some sort of income being 4%, and if you use that money, then you don't add it to the principal either. The principal will stay the same. Now in this situation, you would go, well, it's still doable. It sounds okay. Like we could budget well and we could live on $600 a week if our house is paid off. Well, that's a good outcome, right? But what if the house is not paid off? Well, in this case, you've got to think about how much rent is going to cost you. And if rent is going to cost you about $700 a week, well, you're already negative. And that is why this situation is so dire. If you have a home loan, and let's say you have a $500,000 home loan at an average of 6%, on average, you're having to pay $30,000 a year in just interest repayments. You're not considering insurance, the rates that you've got, and of course the principal that you want to pay down as well. In that case, again, you would run out of money. So, do we want a good situation or do we want something where it's great? You want to reward yourself. You've worked for 40 years and now you're like, well, okay, I've signed up for this. Now I want to retire properly. So how do we actually do it? Now, in addition to all of this, you have to consider as well that you might earn a pension. But again, I wouldn't rely on something like that because who knows what that pension looks like in the next 20 years. I advocate on this channel for you taking ownership of your situation, take accountability of, hey, I'm in this situation because of my own actions. Now that might be good, it might be bad. But what you can do is control your own actions, which means what you do today will make a difference in 15 to 20 years. So knowing that, why would you now rely on someone else taking care of you when you should take care of yourself? So an option that clients have been looking at is buying property in their SMSF. Obviously, I've got Australia's largest real estate channel, which means I talk a lot about real estate. Now, I want you to keep an open mind around what that could look like here in this scenario. So when you're buying property in your SMSF, there are a couple of rules that you need to consider. Number one is you have to have a minimum of 20% versus if you're purchasing outside of your super, you have options with some lenders to go at 10%. The other thing you need to know is that you can't use the equity in one property to purchase multiple properties. So what I mean by this is sometimes you'll have a property that goes up in value. You can use that equity as a deposit for your next property. I've broken this down so simply for yourself in how you can do it outside of super in this video, so definitely go check out that one. So let's assume you buy an investment property for $500,000. With a 20% deposit being $100K plus stamp duty and fees about $30,000, you'll need about $130,000 to complete this purchase. Now, chances are you probably need a little bit more than that for the bank to even consider giving you a loan. It's important to note that not all banks can give you a loan about this. Also consider that not all brokers are actually accredited to get you loans for the SMSF. So if you need help with a broker that actually can get you a loan with the right lenders, then definitely reach out to me. I'll leave a link in the description box below where you can book in a call with the broking team. Now let's look at this example of real clients, Kevin and Anna, who are in their 40s, and they're thinking about what does retirement look like in 20 years time? Because they've done the numbers and they've said, hey, well, I don't think I'm gonna get to the goal that I want to. Let's start taking ownership. And really, you could supercharge your portfolio in less than 10 years. So think about what you'll be able to do in 20 years. So in this case, they have a balance of about 300K. They're going to use 130 for their first property and they've signed up for their second property to purchase that one. So there you go, 500K on the first one, 500K on the second one. Now in this case, the real numbers are the first property is for $502,000, the second property was for $455,000. Now this example is from earlier in this year, but I thought it would still be super relevant for you to understand what is possible. And yes, we can still find properties between 420 all the way up to about 700K where all the numbers actually still make sense in these growth areas. So in this case, the asset value here is $957,000 and it's about $50,000 left in the SMSF after the purchases, which means if there is anything in terms of shortfalls with the rent, they can cover that. In addition to that, if there's any maintenance or any repairs that they need to do, they still have the cash there and the lenders said yes to them given they had the cash in their bank as well. So let's assume 5% growth being conservative, but that is also accounting for the fact that on average, real estate in Australia grows at about 8%. My personal portfolio over the last 11 years has grown at 11%, and for clients on average at Search Property, we're at about 13% annually every year. So 5% I'm very comfortable with. Now in this case, if they retire in their 50s, their property portfolio in 10 years' time will be worth $1.558 million. In their 60 years, which is in 20 years, it would be worth $2.539 million. And at that point, it should be paid off. And the reason it would be paid off is because one, the rents after year 3 would then mean it's positive cash flow. So after all of the expenses, the rent is increasing. The rent that comes in is higher than the expenses that you incur. In addition to that, because you continue working, you'll have employer contributions coming in, which means both of those extra income sources will go towards paying down the loan. And that means you'll be able to pay down the loan a lot quicker. Which means in this case, by the time they're 60, they'll have 2 assets worth $2.5 million. And at the rent of 4% yield, you'll get about $101,000 in income. In this case, if you're just going like for like, this would be a 3x better case than the one above, where they just have the cash invested, whether it's in the bank or whether it's in ETFs, and earning about 4% in terms of income. Now, some things that you need to consider is the ongoing costs of something like having property. You're gonna have property management costs. You're gonna have repairs and maintenance pop up. But when you actually put that on a balance sheet, you're gonna realize that the gains that you make will far outweigh any of the costs you incur. In addition to that, the rent could grow a lot faster than you expect. We have a severe shortage of property here in Australia, and that's not gonna change anytime soon. In addition to that, if you purchase in the right locations, there's low vacancy rates, which means people are hungry to get an investment property. There's tenants that are wanting to rent there. So you're now providing housing by going and purchasing one of these properties, sprucing it up even, and then providing good homes for people. And in this case, the capital growth could be much faster. It could be on average exactly like my portfolio being 11%, which would be almost 2x the results here. Now, as I mentioned earlier, that you can't actually use the equity from one property to purchase another. So a solution for that would be here, in 10 years' time, those 2 properties being worth almost 1.6 million, the debt remaining on that would be about $800,000. The equity in this would be $750,000. So what they could do is they could sell the 2 properties. They would have then, after all costs and taxes, about $600,000. Already in 10 years' time, they'll have a lot more what they would have had by the time they're 60 in twice the amount of time. So in this case, with the $600,000, they could effectively go out there and purchase 4 properties and repeat this process. In this case, the 4 properties at 500K worth would be worth about $2 million, and at a 5% yield, you're making about $100,000. After 10 years, at 5% annual growth, it would be worth $3.2 million, and the 4% yield would mean $128,000 a year. Now keep in mind, you won't have these houses paid off by the time you retire in this situation. But because they will all be positive cash flow, you're gonna be in a strong position where you've got the income coming through, plus you have a larger machine. And this is the part that is very important to understand. Your asset base, by not investing in anything, you're working with 750K. But in this case, by using some leverage, having the right strategy, you have a larger base, a larger machine. 10% growth on 750K is $75,000. But 10% on 3.2 million is $320,000. And that is why it is so important that you pick the right assets, have the right strategy, and real estate in your SMSF is not going to be for everyone. But you have a couple of options where by doing this, you could either continue repeating the process where you buy and sell. You could just sell all of the properties and say, I don't want debt, I don't want headaches of tenants, and you'll still end up with more cash in the bank than you would have if you didn't go down this path. Or you could go and say, well, you know what, I'm gonna sell some of those properties, use the cash and pay down my home, which means now I've paid off my principal place of residence. I might end up with 1 or 2 properties, but now you have this asset base that continues to grow and provide you financial freedom and not rely on the pension or on the government. And that is the key here, is that we're not trying to just retire, we're trying to retire filthy rich. And filthy rich means that you're retiring on your own terms. I hope you guys have enjoyed this video. If you need help with any of this, whether it's the accountant that needs to help you set up something like this, or whether it's the broker that needs to help you get the loans, definitely contact me down below. I'll leave my email there so it'll directly come to me. I hope you guys have enjoyed this video, and if you have, smash that subscribe button, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Thanks guys.